Welcome to Tramlines, a podcast from Agrii. I'm your host, Tony Smith, putting your questions to the experts. Today we're asking, how can we build better crop resilience and rooting in forward crops to overcome the changes in variety susceptibility and changing weather patterns? To help us with those key questions, we have Agrii's Tim Horton, Technical Manager for Combinable Crops, and Jodie Littleford, Technical Manager for Combinable Crop Trials. This episode qualifies for basis and Noroso points. So let's dive in and explore this important question for the approaching season and start by asking, well, how are crops looking on farm right now? Tim, you cover technical inquiries from around the UK. What are you hearing? How are things looking?
Certainly this year, unlike the last few years, we've got well-established both wheat and barley crops going into the winter. They are quite forward. They're already carrying a level of disease in some places, mildew being particularly noticeable. Scotland's already showing some yellow rust as well, so that's a warning sign. And there's also reports of a bit of septoria from that part of the world. So we're going to have a full range of challenges going through winter into spring.
Yeah. And Jodie, from your point of view, looking at the trials, how well established are they? Has it all gone well getting those trials in the ground?
Yeah, I was going to say, off the back of quite an easy harvest after quite a dry and hot spell through the spring and summer months, we had pretty favourable conditions to get the trials in the ground. So, we managed to get things in good time. A lot of things were earlier drilled than they were the last couple of seasons. So, we've got some big biomass crops going into the winter. And as Tim mentioned, lots of challenges around pest pressure and diseases coming in. That means we're going to need some kind of careful management to pull things through the spring and optimize crop potential going into harvest next year.
Yeah. So can we just explore that a little bit more? So what agronomic pressures are there? What disease and pest pressures are you anticipating over the next months, particularly through the winter and as we emerge from the winter? Tim, what are your thoughts there?
Obviously, the change in yellow variety susceptibility in wheat, particularly from yellow rust. Now that we have a lot of varieties that have quite a definite susceptibility to yellow rust, then that is certainly flagging up a lot of concerns from agronomists about how they're going to manage that going through the spring, and what that will entail in terms of trying to keep control of that.
Yeah. So agronomists are already anticipating there are some challenges ahead, and I guess that's been aired in the technical meetings I know that you have at this time of year as you prepare for the spring. We can never know what's going to come up in terms of weather patterns through the winter and through the spring. I mean, what would you like to see in terms of weather through the winter? What would help those crops, Jodie? Would it be cold weather, the continuation of this warmer, quite humid conditions? What would help those crops?
Well, I think current conditions as they are fairly warm and humid. So, that's helping to kind of propagate a lot of the disease that we're seeing. So I think it would be good to, get some frosty weather and get some hard frost through the autumn to actually knock down some of that spore activity. Because as Tim's already mentioned, we've already seen yellow rust this season. So if we continue to get mild weather, then that sets us up for a perfect storm going into the spring next year. And actually, when we look at, the crops that are in the ground, based on, Agrii data, when it comes to disease resistance scores, and actually the crop areas, then around 43% of the area is scoring less than a 4 on resistance for yellow rust at the moment. And actually 77% of the wheat area is less than a 5. So, that sets us up for quite a high disease pressure year when it comes to yellow rust, unless we get some sharp frost to really knock it down.
Tim, that's a huge level of susceptibility, isn't it? So what's caused farmers to choose varieties with that, low level of resistance to that disease? What are they aiming for?
I think, the biggest reason for their choice hasn't been down to the yellow rust ratings. That actually has come about due to the changes we saw last year. And people probably in many ways are still growing what they grew last year. It's just that the scenario has changed. The problem being is there's not really much choice in terms of other varieties you can grow. As Jodie's already mentioned, there's an awful lot of varieties that have this susceptibility. Okay, that changes a bit, but in no situation are you totally escaping that risk. So even if people wanted to choose something new, it doesn't mean they won't still have a risk, really, at the end of the day.
Yeah. Tim, I know that you had a lot of technical inquiries. My inquiry is, well, what is the weather going to do over the next 8 weeks? Do you know?
If only I could predict that, that would make life a lot simpler.
So many ways that's the issue, isn't it? We don't know
No.
what the weather's going to do over the next, few months, isn't it? And to ask you the question, therefore, well, what do farmers need to achieve and get from their crops in terms of performance this spring? Last year, or summer rather, last year was an incredibly difficult year in terms of, having good yields, profitable yields for many farmers. What do farmers need to achieve this year?
As you say, the range of performance last year was probably greater than we've seen for many years. And that has definitely caused issues. There were some good crops out there, but they were certainly the minority compared to most. And it's really getting consistent quality yields that is the key point of view. It's trying to find a way of being more consistent and building up a more consistent result going forward. So it's not seeing that the peaks and troughs we saw last year with the dry conditions, and that does come down to building resilience in the crop, getting a root system that helps support these crops in the variety of different conditions that they're now experiencing. Even just recently, we've seen how unpredictable the weather can be, in that the forecast saying one thing and we seem to get something slightly different all the time. And actually, these periods of dry weather we experienced last year, whereas the year before it was very wet. It's just that uncertainty, and therefore how to manage that. Really, the only solution is to build that better resilience in the crop to make it able to cope with the variety of conditions.
Yeah. So let's talk through what can we do to build in that resilience with the crop in the ground. And you mentioned rooting. Is that the best place to start with in terms of the discussion? Jodie, what are you thinking?
Yeah, so I think, the root system is absolutely crucial to the early stages of that crop development. At the end of the day, it's how that plant is accessing, the nutrients available in the soil, as well as the water, and it kind of sets it up ready for that kind of spring period. And like we say, we don't know what the weather's going to throw at us in the coming spring. It could be another dry, droughty year, or we could end up with an absolute deluge of rain again. So, setting up that root system and allowing that crop to access, available nutrients, that's going to be the key, really.
Yeah. So, Tim, what would you add to that from what you're hearing on the ground?
Well, we're already seeing the difference between those that have used like a manganese seed treatment versus those that haven't, in that they are experiencing less mildew because of that better root system and healthier crop. So that sort of highlights the fact that if you are in front of the game and building that resilience, then the crop can cope with things much better than it can if you're chasing it all the time.
Yeah. And whilst I guess, or do farmers close the gate at this time of year and go, well, I've done my bit for the autumn. I'm maybe going to look forward to my ski holiday or whatever it's going to be. And Tim, I can see you smiling. From the point of view of, well, what can we be looking at? What can we be doing right now to build in that resilience, reduce some of that disease pressure? Is there anything we can do right now?
Certainly, obviously, with the mild weather, there's still a level of aphid pressure, so BYDV pressure, and therefore growers will, in many situations, need to go through crops to treat for aphids, and that gives you the opportunity to get some nutrition into these crops at the time. Things like manganese and zinc can be beneficial. We can use other situations like Inoculate in the autumn does build resilience and support the plant better going forwards. And I know Jodie's done some work on that area.
Yeah, Jodie, go on, tell us about that work you've been doing. Tim's created that platform for you to share that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, we've been using plant elicitors in various ways for a number of years. But now we've got use of Inoculate, which is a peptide-based elicitor. And what this does is it essentially switches on the intrinsic defense responses within the plant. And we've done trials over the last few years looking at application timings, either in the early spring, and now looking at autumn followed by early spring applications. And we've shown benefit in a boost to crop health, and therefore allowing the plant to cope better with disease as it comes in. And because this is a biostimulatory boost, we tend to see an added yield benefit from that as well. So that tends to range from around 1/3 of a tonne a hectare up to 1/2 a tonne a hectare. So it does work effectively well. We do find in yellow rust situations it needs some additional help in terms of kind of chemistry support in the spring, because as we know, yellow rust cycles incredibly quickly. So yeah, the chemistry does tend to help in those situations.
Moving on from that rooting to, of course, you talked about the pressure coming from disease, but other pests as well. We mustn't forget weed burden here. What have you noticed in terms of any changes in the pressure from weed burdens, establishment, and emergence of, for example, blackgrass? Has that been different this autumn with this mild and early establishment of the crops, Tim?
Yeah, it does vary a bit across the country. Where people were drilling into cleaner situations, then maintaining that weed control level has been generally good, as long as you've gone robust enough with your pre-emergence type treatments. There are some situations where perhaps people drilled too early in the wrong situations, and therefore they were chasing problems rather than being in front of them, which always is never a good place to be, really. But in general terms, I would say weed control has worked pretty well. Feedback is good as long as they follow the right guidelines in terms of when to drill different fields, different blocks, and use appropriate chemistry to actually match the likely weed burden that they were chasing after.
Okay, great. So we talked about disease pressure, talked about weed pressure there, and also touched on the pressure from aphids there and BYDV. What about other insect pests? Goutfly, I know you've mentioned, has been very prevalent at the moment.
Yeah, certainly earlier on with a lot of these earlier drilled crops, people were finding high levels of goutfly eggs. In many situations, or certainly quite a few situations, that treatments did get applied to try and reduce the impact of that. In more moderate situations, then actually treatment, certainly insecticidal treatment, isn't necessarily required. But if you can build a more resilient plant again with a better root system, therefore it will support more tillers and compensate in that way rather than having to target the pest directly. Usually in a more moderate situation, if the goutfly takes out 1, perhaps 2 tillers, then if you've got a strong enough plant, it will automatically compensate. But in some situations, we've saw last year in a few places where actually they were taking out 4 or 5 tillers and only leaving a single tillered plant. And in those situations, then trying to get compensation was more difficult. So it's all about understanding the level of the pest and dealing with it appropriately.
Listen to the previous Tramlines episode, Beyond the Bottom Line, Strategies for Resilient Farming, exploring how to strengthen your farm business and tackle the challenges of 2 tough years of crop establishment. attention to detail is as important, if not more important than ever before, in terms of monitoring that crop and making decisions as we go along. Is that the sort of the core thread of what farmers need to be doing, is attention to detail?
Absolutely. And I think in a year like this is where, we've got a lot of crop potential out there. We've got good established crops. The yield potential is set quite high at the moment. And as we know, throughout the year, all the actions we take is all trying to protect that potential and stop that drop off, be it caused by weeds, pests, diseases, or nutritional deficiencies. So, having that attention to detail to take action and combat some of these challenges, that's essentially going to lead to, the best result at the end of the day, and hopefully achieving the best yield outcomes.
I presume most of this discussion is obviously been around winter wheat. What about barley crops?
So barley crops also established very well. Generally, they were drilled early in the first weeks, where so if anything, they've got more tillers and stronger plants. It does mean they're carrying probably more disease, particularly mildew. But also with barley, because they are they need their tillers to get yield. Actually, having your tiller numbers is even more important than in wheat, where it only sets its yield quite late on. Whereas in barley, you need ears per square meter, so tillers, to actually get really good yields out of them.
Yeah, okay. I know that you wanted to talk about second wheats. Let's just come back to second wheats and the benefit of rooting support there. What are your thoughts, Tim and Jodie? What are your thoughts there?
So I suppose with second wheats, there's that, risk and potential from, take all, which can take out a lot of the kind of root mass, which can influence, nutrient and water uptake. So, being able to preserve that root and encourage rooting is even more important. So, yeah, all the points that we've already highlighted become even more important when we consider second wheats. And because we've had such an open autumn, people have taken that opportunity to plant more second wheats. So it means that, again, there's more attention to detail that needs to be given to take care of those crops.
What do you think will be, if you like, the talking points when you come to, spring meetings or the trials tours that you have later on in next year? What do you think will end up being the focus of discussion?
I think some of the focus of discussion will be around, how the crops have come through the autumn and the winter period, how they came into the spring. And then I suppose it's that continuation of, that disease carryover, how the weather has influenced that through that winter period, whether we had any frosts or, whether we've entered the spring in a high disease pressure scenario. But ultimately, the weather will very much decide and dictate, where we go with those conversations, because that's the one thing that's out of our control, but equally is probably one of the biggest factors that has an effect on crop performance and how the season unravels.
Yeah, sure. And how that season unravels is so important, isn't it? As you said, there's good crop potential there. We've got to try and maximise that opportunity. So, Tim, looking ahead over the next few months, you've talked about that high level of disease susceptibility that's in the crops this year. What should farmers be starting to gear up in terms of thinking and mindset as we go forward? So as we emerge from winter, where should our focus be? Where should our attention to detail be? And what can we do?
As we've already mentioned, building some crop resilience in the system will definitely be beneficial. Generally with yellow rust, early treatments to take out the early disease makes a huge difference to how you manage things going forwards. So having products that will give you some curative disease in the early stages is very much needed. But we need to build something with good protection as well. So it is using a combination and using all the tools available to us will be key going forwards. And also not being too dogmatic with our approach, making sure that we are managing both the disease and the crop that's appropriate at the time, and not just going with a sort of standard programmed approach just because that's what they've always done.
Yeah, absolutely right. And for the listeners listening in today, if you hear some noises in the background, that is indeed a dog. It's not Tim's digestion working hard after breakfast. In fact, Tim's dog's featured many times on this podcast. Very welcome indeed. Jodie, that point that Tim's making there about not being too dogmatic, I love the way you use that phrase, and being flexible in our approach. Is that the key to success, particularly with this high level of disease susceptibility?
I think there is an element of pre-planning needing to go into the spring, as well as that flexibility, an awareness of, the potential disease pressure ahead, and therefore an understanding of, what tools are available, be it, elicitors or, additional nutrients in the form of, manganese, zinc, etc. And as Tim's highlighted, thinking about the toolkit of actives that we have in fungicides, and how to use them appropriately, especially when we think about, things like strobs, where, we can only use 2 of those across the program, trying to think about where they're going to be best placed, and where we can kind of swap those out potentially for, mixed triazole type actives. So I think, an element of flexibility, but equally going into it with at least a bit of planning ahead in the thought process.
Yeah. And Tim, I know that agronomists this time of year and through the winter months are always very, very busy with training and thinking and planning, reviewing the trials results, talking to experts like yourselves. Are these the questions that they're asking as well, so that they're able to give that amazing advice that they do give?
Yeah, very much so. It is trying to understand how to put the program together under the expected high pressure of this next spring, with so many varieties showing such a high level of susceptibility. Then actually attention to detail and how you put things together, your programs together, will be key, definitely, without a doubt. And we will need all the tools that we have available to us in order to maintain good disease control and hold on to that green leaf, and then ultimately drive that yield potential.
Yeah, and I guess we're all very lucky that we've got so much research and development to look at and review in order to, be well armed and have that armory ready, if you like. Jodie, thinking about this year then, the high disease pressure, you've got the trials in the ground. Do you flex what you use in those trials, or is that established in your treatment protocols already? There's a question for you. Share how you're going to approach that from your point of view to generate that data for discussion this time next year.
Good question. The thought process for spring protocols starts, months ahead of when we get to that season, and there's a discussion around what crops are in the ground, what the disease potential is going to be. Generally we've got varieties drilled up in blocks, ready for specific disease targeted trials. So, there is an element of pre-planning protocols to try and develop specific data for specific actives, products, or diseases. But equally, myself and Tim will have discussions in the lead up to the spring, and we can be adapting protocols or coming up with new ideas, trying to take advantage of any of the opportunities that present themselves to generate more data and generate more information, so that both our agronomists and our customers can benefit from that. So it's a bit of both, really, of planning ahead and thinking about what data we might want to create, but also taking advantage of the season to try and create information that is relevant to the scenarios that are playing out in front of us.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've got a couple of minutes here to sort of round up this podcast, but if you were going to give advice, and I'm sure you will be at farmer meetings over the next few months, what are going to be your top tips that you would urge farmers who are listening and thinking, these crops have got to perform financially for my farm business this year? If we listen to our recent podcast, Beyond the Bottom Line, achieving a successful gross margin is really critical. So to build in and deliver this resilience that is very much a buzzword, what are your top tips that those listening today can take away and really, utilize over the next few months? It's a big question, isn't it? But it's a very important question. Tim, what are your thoughts?
I think the first thing to do is understand the issues and the level of the issues. And okay, we've talked a bit about the changes in yellow rust, but also with the early drilling, then the risk of septoria also will increase. And we know how that can rob yield so effectively. So actually understanding what your target is and planning to start your programming in good time. We've mentioned building early resilience will be a key part of the program, and so it's getting plants that are healthy and able to cope with the different conditions. It's using the tools that can actually also build and support plants in those situations, and then almost using our fungicides and things as the sort of follow-up parts to actually having set that crop up in the early spring.
Yeah, and Jodie, what are your thoughts?
So I suppose the kind of key takeaway from me would be, ultimately that the weather is the one thing that's out of our control. So, try and control the controllables. So building a resilient crop is going to be the key to helping us, through whatever challenging conditions, the spring and summer throws at us. I think, from a yellow rust perspective, understanding that, you're going to have to start those programs early, depending on, when the disease actually comes into those crops. And Tim's already highlighted that actually, this year has the potential to be a big septoria year with earlier drilled crops. So, if we get that rainfall through that spring period, then, we're really going to have to look after crops from a septoria perspective. So, we've got the crop potential. And I think, we're at a point now where, investing in our crops now and throughout the spring, that's going to see us through getting the best returns and ultimately getting the best yields and the best margins.
Yeah. And just to finish on that high, you talked about that the potential is there to have a really successful, cropping year. Is that how you genuinely feel looking at all the trials when you travel around the country, Jodie?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, some of the trials in the ground are the best that we've seen in quite a number of years, which is, incredibly promising. Both wheats, barleys, rape, they all look very well going into the autumn. So I'm sure everyone will be very happy disappearing off to go for their shoot or off skiing. Safe in mind that, they've got some good crops in the ground.
Yeah. And Tim, I can see you nodding very actively there on screen. Would you agree with what Jodie just said?
Oh, totally. I think the good autumn establishment has set up good potential across the board in terms of autumn crops. So there is a good starting point, but it will be key, that management going forwards, to try and actually realise that potential that has been set up.
Thank you, Tim and Jodie, for your incredibly valuable advice as we look to reaping the best potential from our winter sown crops by building better resilience through better rooting and attention to detail through the growing season. Do stay tuned here on Tramlines and do have a listen to our previous episode, Beyond the Bottom Line, Strategies for Resilient Farming, exploring how to strengthen your farm business and tackle the challenges of 2 tough years of crop establishment. If you have any questions for our experts that you'd like answered, email them in to info@agrii.co.uk. That's it for this podcast, but do tune in again as we meet the experts throughout the season, exploring the many immediate and longer-term questions for growers and farmers in the UK. See you next time.